A furious billionaire storms into a five-star hotel, yelling in Arabic. No one understands him. Chaos erupts, guests panic, until a quiet black maid steps forward and says one sentence that silences the entire room. What she reveals next will change everything. He's yelling again. The front desk receptionist dropped her pen in panic as a booming voice echoed across the luxurious lobby of the Magnolia Royale Hotel, the most elite five-star property in the city. A hush fell over the room as heads turned toward the commotion. The marble floors, gold-plated railings, and enormous chandelier that normally screamed sophistication and calm now seemed to vibrate with tension. In the center of the chaos stood a tall man, dignified yet furious, dressed in a flowing white dish dasha, immaculately pressed, with gold cufflinks that shimmered under the lights. The Arab billionaire looked every bit as powerful as his reputation suggested. His skin was tanned from desert suns, and his salt and pepper beard was trimmed with precision. But it was his eyes, sharp, fiery, and wet with frustration, that caught everyone's attention. Beside him stood two towering bodyguards, both dressed in jet-black suits with earpieces barely visible. Their faces were unreadable, expressionless, like statues, but their eyes scanned the lobby with silent vigilance. They weren't just protecting their boss. They were also containing him. The billionaire stood beside the grand piano, one hand clenched into a fist, the other waving a sweet key card in the air like a demand for justice. His voice, loud and laced with urgency, echoed through the high ceilings, spoken entirely in rapid, emphatic Arabic. No one knew what he was saying, but the message was clear. This was no small complaint. Guests on the plush velvet sofas began murmuring. A child clutched her mother's hand. A businessman near the bar stood up slowly, ready to leave. The lobby, usually a symbol of elegance and quiet luxury, now felt like a battlefield about to erupt. "Why didn't we arrange for a translator?" The hotel manager, Mr. Reynolds, hissed under his breath, barely able to hide the sweat forming on his forehead. His neatly combed hair was beginning to fall out of place, and his clipboard trembled in his hand. He's not just some VIP guest. He's the VIP, the sheik. The receptionist looked at him helplessly, her hands trembling. "We weren't told he didn't speak English. That's not an excuse," Mr. Reynolds snapped, lowering his voice as the billionaire's tone grew louder. The man pointed at his sweet key again, then gestured wildly toward the elevators, then toward the staff. The concierge stepped forward, try his best. "Sir, please, room?" "Yes." "Okay, we help you." He pointed at the key and smiled awkwardly, but the billionaire's expression only darkened. He barked something in Arabic and gestured toward his wrist as if pointing to a watch. "He's talking about time." The bellboy whispered nervously. "Maybe check in?" Something about being late. The billionaire suddenly slammed his palm onto the marble front desk. A loud crack shot through the air. Guests gasped. One woman dropped her champagne glass. Shards scattered across the marble floor. Security cameras turned. Staff across the room froze. "We're losing control," Mr. Reynolds muttered. "Where is the assistant manager?" "In a meeting upstairs." "Then get him out. Now." The billionaire took a step back and wiped his brow with a silk handkerchief. His face was flushed. For a moment, his gaze lifted upward toward the ceiling, as if calling for divine patience. Then he leaned forward and shouted again, pointing sharply toward the corner of the lobby, where the luxury elevators were lined in polished brass. The bodyguards remained still, but their presence alone made the room tense. One guest near the front door whispered, "Do you think we should leave?" "I don't know, but I'm not getting involved," another said, clutching his briefcase. The front desk receptionist glanced at her phone, tempted to call the police, but even that felt dangerous. The man yelling wasn't a criminal. He was a billionaire, a Middle Eastern royal. The hotel had received notice weeks in advance about his arrival. Special amenities had been arranged. His suite had been prepared to perfection. Rose petals imported from Turkey. Egyptian cotton sheets. Hand-delivered wine from Spain. But now, none of that seemed to matter. The language barrier had built a wall between the hotel and one of its most powerful guests, and no one knew how to tear it down. The concierge tried again. "We're sorry, sir. Can you write?" The billionaire looked at him like he had just asked the most offensive question on earth. He shook his head furiously, then pulled out his phone and typed something, then held it up. The screen glowed with Arabic script. Complex, emotional, rapidly typed in frustration. Mr. Reynolds stared at it, but couldn't read a word. "For heaven's sake, get Google Translate," he barked at the receptionist. She fumbled with her phone, opened the app, and tried scanning the text. The translation came up in broken English. "My daughter is missing. Your hotel is failing me." Mr. Reynolds turned pale. "Daughter? He has a child with him." I didn't know," the receptionist stammered. There was nothing in the check-in file. The billionaire now pointed toward the entrance again, then toward the bar, the bathrooms, the elevators. His words were faster now, louder, more desperate. And then something changed in his expression. The fury gave way to something deeper. His voice cracked slightly. His hand, once clenched, now trembled. It wasn't just a tantrum. It was panic, heartache, maybe even fear. One of the guards leaned in and murmured something in Arabic to him. The billionaire shook his head and waved him away. Mr. Reynolds stepped forward cautiously, hands up, trying to show calm. "We're trying to understand you, sir. Please, just give us one moment." But it was clear the man wasn't just angry. He was pleading, and no one in the room could help. No one could understand him. Not the manager, not the concierge, not the receptionist or the bellboy. The richest man in the room was also the most alone, and the clock was ticking. "Excuse me," an elderly woman whispered, inching toward the front desk, her pearl earrings swaying with each step. "This is very unsettling. We paid for a peaceful vacation." Her voice, though soft, seemed to echo louder than it should have. It was a signal, a crack in the dam. Other guests soon followed. From behind the velvet curtains of privacy and privilege, murmurs swelled. Couples looked around nervously. Parents clutched their children's hands just a little tighter. A man in a golf cap, clearly frustrated, took out his phone and began recording. Then another guest, and another. Dozens of phones were lifted silently into the air. Screens glowed like little judgmental eyes. In the middle of it all, the billionaire's voice continued to roll across the lobby like thunder. Loud, frustrated, painful. The tension in the air was no longer limited to hotel staff. It now had an audience. Mr. Reynolds, the hotel manager, stood frozen behind the desk, his mouth dry and his nerves frayed. Sweat soaked the collar of his buttoned shirt, his tie now visibly loosened. He looked like a man standing at the edge of a cliff, hoping for a rope that wouldn't come. He turned sharply to the two bodyguards, trying to salvage whatever control he had left. "Please," he pleaded, lowering his voice. "English? French? Spanish?" One of the guards simply shook his head. The other one turned slightly, eyes scanning the lobby, but offered no translation. The billionaire then did something that made everyone in the room take a step back. With a sudden roar of frustration, he raised his fist and slammed it down hard onto the marble counter. Crack! The sound was sharp and final. A spiderweb fracture bloomed instantly across the pristine white surface, like lightning frozen in stone. Several guests screamed. One woman dropped her designer handbag. A man near the coffee station ducked instinctively. The sound of glass hitting tile echoed from somewhere nearby. A second later, the building's security alarm was triggered, one of the motion detectors, set off by the unexpected impact. A shrill beep erupted from the ceiling speakers. Red lights blinked on the control panels near the elevator. Panic rippled through the room like a slow-moving wave. The receptionist, hands shaking, leaned close to Mr. Reynolds. "Should I call the police?" she whispered urgently. Mr. Reynolds's eyes widened in horror. No, don't do that. He's not some drunk guest. He's a royal investor from Dubai. He owns shares in our parent company. Then what do we do? Nothing that will go public, Reynolds snapped under his breath. We can't afford scandal. One wrong move, and this hotel's reputation is finished. They both turned to look at the billionaire again. And what they saw wasn't what they expected. His voice, once fiery, now dropped to a trembling murmur. His face no longer radiated fury. It wore the unmistakable marks of grief. He pointed again, this time not with rage, but desperation, toward the elevator, then his room, then the hallway. His mouth moved slowly now, repeating the same word again and again in Arabic. Tears had begun to well in his eyes, glistening beneath the chandelier's lights. There was a pause in the room, a strange silence that settled over the guests like a heavy curtain. Even the murmuring had stopped. The phone still hovered in hands, but now without movement. A few people lowered their arms, unsure of what to record anymore, because suddenly it was clear this wasn't just rage. It was heartbreak. The anger had only been the surface. Underneath, it was something deeper, more human, more painful. The man, this powerful, unreachable billionaire, was breaking down. A child across the room, unaware of the tension, asked innocently, "Why is that man sad, Mommy?" The mother pulled her close and didn't answer. Mr. Reynolds stepped back from the desk, the full weight of realization crashing down on him. This wasn't a complaint about a bad room or late service. This wasn't entitlement or arrogance. The gestures now made sense. The elevator, the room, the urgency. "I think," he whispered slowly, "I think he's lost someone." "What?" the receptionist asked, startled. "He keeps pointing to the elevators and his key, over and over. And did you see him tap his wrist like he was wearing a watch earlier?" "Yeah. What does that mean?" "It's time. It's time-related, or maybe someone's late. Or someone's gone." The billionaire, now, placed both hands flat on the counter, lowering his head between them. His shoulders trembled. The guards, who had remained still and composed, exchanged worried glances. Finally, one of them stepped forward and whispered something to their employer in Arabic. The billionaire shook his head, slow and emphatic, and waved him away. Then he wiped his face with a silk handkerchief. No one spoke. No one dared move. It was in that moment that people began to see him, not as a billionaire, not as a foreigner, not as a threat, but as a father, a man in pain. The emotion was raw and naked, and it filled the room like smoke. No one could translate the words, but they could all understand the feeling. Grief was universal. A man in a linen blazer stepped forward, breaking the silence. "Maybe we should just ask what he needs? I mean, even if it's broken English." Mr. Reynolds shook his head. "He's beyond words now. He's looking for something or someone. We need a translator." Immediately, the concierge, now visibly nervous, added, "Do you think it's a missing person?" "I don't know," Mr. Reynolds muttered, "but we can't stand here guessing. We need help." Meanwhile, the billionaire slowly lowered himself onto the leather armchair near the piano. He rested both elbows on his knees, head in hands. He was still speaking, but now only to himself, soft and nearly inaudible. One of the guests walked up to Mr. Reynolds, phone still recording. "You should fix this quickly. I'm going to post this online if I don't get an answer." "Please don't," Mr. Reynolds pleaded. "We're trying." But trying wasn't enough. The most powerful man in the building had just shattered. Not just the marble counter, but the illusion that money protects you from real pain. He was hurting, and no one in that room could understand what he needed. Until, from across the lobby, a voice spoke up. Soft, confident, in Arabic. But that comes next. From behind the velvet curtains, someone stepped forward, slowly, quietly, as though unsure whether she was even allowed to interrupt. Her shoes made no sound on the polished marble, but somehow her presence cut through the tension more effectively than any alarm or shout. She wasn't dressed like management or security. She didn't wear a blazer or carry a walkie-talkie. She wore the dark green uniform of the cleaning staff. Her sleeves were rolled up, a white cloth loosely gripped in one hand. She had a calm, steady expression, and her eyes were focused, not on the guests, not on the growing crowd, but directly on the man at the center of the storm. Her name tag caught the light. Amina, mid-30s, dark skin, glowing softly under the chandelier. Her long braids were neatly tied back into a bun, no strands out of place. There was a quiet dignity in her walk, a grounded confidence that didn't seek attention but somehow earned it anyway. At first, no one noticed her. Why would they? She wasn't in charge. She wasn't security. She was just the maid, part of the invisible background of the hotel, moving silently through hallways, making beds, emptying bins, wiping down surfaces, and slipping away before anyone could even remember her name. But now, as the room held its collective breath, she stopped just a few feet from the billionaire and his guards. The tension was thick, every eye locked on the man whose pain had become the center of attention, and now on this woman who dared to approach him. Then she spoke. Assalamu alaikum, Sayyidi. Hal yumkinuni al-Musaida. Peace be upon you, sir. May I help you? Amina turned her head calmly toward him and nodded once. Fluently. My father was Egyptian. I grew up in Alexandria. I moved here after university. Her voice was composed, neither proud nor apologetic. Just honest. There was a long pause. And then, as though a dam had broken inside him, the billionaire stepped forward, tears beginning to rise behind his eyes. His voice changed. Gone was the angry shouting, the hard consonants, and commanding tone. Now he spoke with desperation, emotion, fragility. He leaned slightly toward her, speaking in a flurry of Arabic that, to everyone else, sounded like a song they couldn't understand. But to Amina, it was a cry for help. He was no longer yelling. He was begging. Amina nodded slowly as she listened, responding with soft words and careful questions. Her face didn't change. She didn't panic. She didn't fumble. She simply listened like someone who had seen real pain before and knew how to hold space for it. The billionaire's story came pouring out like floodwater. His daughter, 6 years old, had gone missing the moment they arrived. The staff had escorted him to the front desk while she played near the fountain. Then she vanished. He'd been trying to explain for nearly 15 minutes, but no one understood him. His English was limited, and his anxiety had overwhelmed even the few words he knew. His daughter had a rare neurological condition, nonverbal autism, and carried no phone or ID. She needed medication. Every minute mattered. As he spoke, Amina nodded again. Then she placed a gentle hand on his forearm, a gesture of grounding and compassion. She said something soft in Arabic, and he breathed for the first time in what felt like hours. Then she turned to Mr. Reynolds, her voice now commanding but calm. His daughter is missing, she said. She wandered off before the guards noticed. She doesn't speak. She has a medical condition. He's been trying to tell us all along. Mr. Reynolds blanched. Missing? Why didn't he say that before? He did. We just weren't listening, Amina replied, not unkindly. At her words, the entire room shifted from confusion to urgency. What does she look like? The receptionist asked quickly. 6 years old, curly black hair, pink dress with silver shoes. Her name is Lena. Mr. Reynolds turned to the staff. Search everywhere, every wing, every floor. Lock down the exits. Notify security and check the cameras. The team snapped into action. Amina turned back to the billionaire and reassured him in Arabic. He nodded quickly and whispered something. She listened carefully, then gestured toward the garden courtyard. She loves water. He thinks she may have gone outside to watch the koi fish. The concierge radioed the outdoor staff. Within moments, the message spread like wildfire. Then, just minutes later, there was a call from the courtyard. She's here. She's safe. The billionaire rushed toward the entrance, Amina at his side. There, sitting peacefully by the koi pond, was Lena. She was humming softly to herself, watching the fish with wide eyes. She looked up and smiled when she saw her father running into his arms without a word. He dropped to his knees and hugged her tightly, sobbing openly. His white robe rippled around them as he held her, his body shaking with relief. Amina stood nearby, her eyes wet but her expression serene. She had understood the man not just with language, but with empathy, the one thing more powerful than any translation app or five-star training. When they returned to the lobby, every guest who had been recording earlier now stood in stunned silence. Many lowered their phones. A few even wiped away tears. The billionaire walked up to Amina, still holding his daughter's hand, and said something quietly in Arabic. She replied just as softly. Mr. Reynolds approached awkwardly. What did he say? Amina looked over at him, then back at the billionaire. He said, I saved his life, she said. And in that moment, The maid nobody saw became the most important person in the entire hotel. Amina took a deep breath, steadying herself. Her heart was pounding, but her face showed none of it. She had grown up navigating 2 cultures, 2 languages, in a world where people constantly underestimated her. But in this moment, her voice cut through the noise like a blade through fog. She turned to Mr. Reynolds, who stood paralyzed behind the desk, still holding a radio he hadn't used. His face was pale, sweat beading along his temple. His daughter, Lena, is missing, Amina said softly but clearly. He came to check into his suite. She was beside him, but while he was dealing with the check-in, she slipped away before the guards realized. She has a medical condition. He's terrified. There was a pause, a long, heavy silence that settled over the lobby like dust after an explosion. The panic of moments ago had mutated into something quieter, deeper. A few guests lowered their phones. Others exchanged awkward glances. The narrative had shifted. No longer was the billionaire some angry, loud stranger causing a scene. He was a father, alone in a foreign country, unable to find his child and unable to ask for help. Suddenly, the shouting wasn't frightening. It was devastating. Mr. Reynolds swallowed hard, trying to regain some semblance of composure. How do you know all that? He told me, Amina replied. You just didn't understand. She turned back to the billionaire, her eyes soft. In Arabic, she asked him calmly for more details about the little girl, what she looked like, what she was wearing, where she might have gone. The man reached into the inside pocket of his robe and pulled out a small photograph, the edges slightly worn. He held it out with trembling fingers. It was a picture of a young girl, no older than 6. Her smile was wide, missing a front tooth. Her curly black hair was held up with a pink headband. She wore a pink dress with little white butterflies on it and sparkly silver shoes. Her eyes, dark and bright, mirrored her father's. Amina studied the photo carefully, then nodded. She turned on her heel with sudden energy, her voice rising, not in panic, but in command. Okay, listen up. We're doing a search, she said, addressing the staff who had gathered in the lobby. Time is critical. She pointed to the bellboy. Check the East Wing hallways. Look inside the spa, restrooms, storage closets, anywhere a child might wander into. The bellboy nodded and took off running. She said, pointing to a housekeeper, search the courtyard. She may have gone outside. Check around a koi pond and the garden paths. The housekeeper didn't hesitate. Yes, ma'am. Amina turned to the kitchen staff. Someone get to the pastry area. If she has a sweet tooth, she might have followed the smell. Within seconds, the staff who had been frozen in confusion were now moving with purpose. Even Mr. Reynolds, to his credit, snapped out of his daze. I'll check the security feed, he muttered, darting toward the back office. One of the bodyguards approached Amina. You're sure she understands everything? The billionaire nodded before Amina could answer. His hand landed on the guard's shoulder, and he spoke quietly in Arabic. The guard looked surprised, then simply gave a respectful nod. Amina moved swiftly through the lobby, issuing instructions, comforting the father, coordinating with the staff, translating when necessary. She wasn't shouting or panicking. Her calmness was infectious. She radiated the kind of authority people didn't question, not because it was forced, but because it made sense. She paused only to kneel and comfort a frightened guest who had overheard the word missing and thought there might be danger. Amina reassured her gently, then rose and continued. Outside, the hotel's garden glistened under the golden wash of sunset. The koi pond in the center sparkled as the water shimmered around the bright orange and white fish. The courtyard was usually a place for evening tea, quiet reading, and Instagram photos. Today, it had become a place of hope. One of the gardeners noticed something and whispered to the housekeeper who had been sent outside. The housekeeper gasped and radioed in immediately. She's here, by the pond, sitting on the stone edge. She's safe. The words echoed through the lobby like a bell. Everyone froze for a moment before the tension snapped all at once. Amina took off running, the billionaire just steps behind her. When Amina reached the koi pond, her breath caught. There, seated cross-legged, was a little girl in a pink dress. Her curly hair bounced slightly as she tilted her head, watching the koi swim in lazy circles. She was humming quietly, a rhythm only she understood. Amina knelt beside her, slowly, gently. "Lena," she asked in Arabic. The girl turned and blinked at her. There was no fear in her face, just curiosity. She tilted her head again, smiled, and reached out to touch Amina's sleeve. "Your Baba is looking for you," Amina said softly. "He's very worried." The girl's expression shifted. Something about the name Baba seemed to click. From behind them, footsteps thundered across the path. The billionaire appeared, his robe catching the wind as he rushed toward them. He dropped to his knees beside his daughter. She looked up, and, in a heartbeat, her arms wrapped around his neck. No words were spoken, but everything was understood. The man held her so tightly, it was as though he feared she might vanish again. His whole body shook. Tears streamed down his face, soaking the fabric of his robe. His sobs were not loud, but they were gut-wrenching. Amina stepped back to give them space, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. The bodyguard stood nearby, quietly wiping their eyes. When the billionaire finally pulled back, he looked at his daughter, then turned to Amina. His voice broke as he spoke a sentence in Arabic so soft, only she could hear it. She bowed her head gently, replying with a modest smile. "Alhamdulillah," she said. "Thank God." They walked back into the hotel together. The billionaire cradled his daughter in his arms. Guests and staff parted like water around them. Phones that had once recorded now lowered in shame or awe. A few people clapped quietly, touched by what they had witnessed. And then, as they stepped into the center of the lobby once more, the billionaire turned toward Amina. He opened his arms and embraced her, holding her like family. Then, in front of everyone, managers, guests, employees, he bowed his head in deep, sincere gratitude. The most powerful man in the room had been saved not by security, not by hotel executives, not by wealth, but by the maid no one had paid attention to. Until now. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the final golden rays cast long shadows across the polished marble floor of the Magnolia Royale Hotel, the once chaotic lobby had returned to its usual state of elegance and calm. Guests sipped evening drinks. The grand piano played soft jazz. The fountain trickled peacefully in the corner. But beneath the surface, everyone who had witnessed the day's events knew that something had shifted, not just in the atmosphere, but in the hearts of those who had been there. Mr. Reynolds stood at the front desk, his ties slightly loosened, still recovering from the emotional storm that had passed through his lobby just hours earlier. He kept glancing toward the elevator, waiting, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt, tapping his fingers nervously on the edge of the desk. The memory of Amina's voice cutting through the chaos, of her commanding presence, and of the raw humanity on display between the billionaire and his daughter, none of it would leave him. Finally, the elevator doors opened with a soft chime. The billionaire emerged, calm and regal once again, now dressed in a new white dishdasha, embroidered with subtle silver threads. His face, once filled with worry, now bore a quiet dignity. His daughter, Lena, walked beside him, her small hand in his, a stuffed camel tucked under her arm. The hotel gift shop's quiet donation to a traumatic day. Behind them walked the translator, a young woman who had arrived hours after the crisis, now playing catch-up to the story that had already written itself. Amina stood beside Mr. Reynolds, still in her maid's uniform. She had offered a change, but the billionaire insisted she remain exactly as she had been, the way she looked when she saved the day. The billionaire came to a stop before the hotel manager. He released his daughter's hand gently and spoke with authority and poise. The translator stepped forward. "He requests a meeting with the hotel's leadership," she said, her voice soft but firm. Mr. Reynolds nodded. "Of course. Right away." "No," the translator added, listening again. "He means now. Here, with everyone who was present earlier." The lobby staff gathered quickly. Bellboys, housekeepers, even a chef stepped forward, curious but respectful. A few guests remained in the background, pretending not to eavesdrop. The billionaire turned and looked directly at Amina. Then, Through the translator, he began to speak. She's the reason my daughter is alive. Not because she found her, but because she listened. She saw me when no one else did. She knew what I was saying even when my words failed. He turned to Mr. Reynolds now, pointing gently at Amina. I want her promoted, he said. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. Mr. Reynolds blinked, completely taken aback. Why, yes. Of course. She deserves it. We'll adjust her role immediately. She should never wear that uniform again, the billionaire added. Unless she chooses to. From this moment on, she is not background. She is leadership. Amina's eyes widened, but she said nothing. Her hands were clasped in front of her, trying to remain calm, though her heart raced. But the billionaire wasn't finished. He spoke again, and the translator hesitated for a moment, surprised by the next part of the message. He says she began slowly. He would like Amina to come work for him in Dubai as his family's personal cultural advisor and interpreter. The lobby collectively gasped. The bellboy dropped the room, key he'd been holding. A server actually placed a tray down and stepped closer, trying to make sure he heard it right. He says she will be part of his household's inner staff. The translator continued. With a private suite, full benefits, and a salary 3 times what she earns here. Amina took a step back, stunned. Me? She said, her voice barely audible. The billionaire smiled gently. He stepped forward, placing his hand over his heart, a traditional gesture of respect, and nodded. Naam. Inti. Yes. You. Mr. Reynolds looked between the two of them, speechless. That's incredibly generous, he finally managed. Amina, Amina wasn't hearing him. Her mind was racing. She had come to this hotel 2 years ago, cleaning toilets, scrubbing floors, folding towels with precise corners. Most days, no one spoke to her beyond giving orders. No one asked about her story. No one knew she had once dreamed of becoming a diplomat, that she spoke 3 languages, that she had worked part-time in a library while taking online courses, that she had moved here to send money home to her younger brothers in Nairobi. And now, out of nowhere, everything was different. Everything. Your life changes today, the translator said, quoting the billionaire's next words. He says the offer is not just a job. It's a recognition of who you truly are. Someone who leads with empathy, intelligence, and courage. Amina's throat tightened. Her eyes began to blur. She tried to speak, but the words caught in her chest. Thank you, she whispered. I don't know what to say. The billionaire smiled again. Just say yes. There was a pause. And then, I accept. And with those 2 words, the lobby erupted into soft applause. Even the guests clapped. A few staff members wiped tears from their eyes. Mr. Reynolds stepped forward, reaching out to shake her hand. You've made us proud, Amina. We'll miss you, but you've earned this and so much more. The translator offered her a business card. The flight leaves in 3 days. First class. We'll arrange everything. The billionaire turned and gently motioned to Lena, who walked over and handed Amina a small pink envelope. Inside was a hand-drawn picture, a stick-figure girl holding hands with a tall woman in a maid's cap. Above it was written in wobbly handwriting, Shukran. Amina held the drawing to her chest, overwhelmed. From that moment on, Amina was no longer just the quiet woman in the background, no longer the one who faded into the edges of photos or went unacknowledged at staff dinners. She had become the woman who stepped up when no one else could, the one who spoke when no one else understood, the one who didn't just clean the hotel. She changed it, and in doing so, she changed her own life. Forever. What would you have done in Amina's place? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more real drama stories. Thanks for watching.